You're listening to the Cycling Podcast in association with Rapha. Rapha exists to improve your ride with the finest kit, inspiring stories and vibrant clubhouses across the globe.
Hello, my name's Richard Moore. This is the Cycling Podcast, and we have something a little bit different this week. It's a conversation recorded during the Vuelta a España between Orla Chennaoui and Ned Boulting. Both work primarily in television, of course, though Orla also presents the Cycling Podcast Femina with me. But Orla was keen to talk to Ned about their shared experiences and also the different strands to Ned's very unusual career. As well as the TV bit, which he's been doing now for 14 years, Ned has written books and more recently embarked on a solo show called Bikeology. There was a short run last winter. I saw it and I was struck both by how accomplished and funny it was and how astonishing it was that Ned had essentially created a stand-up comedy show about professional cycling. It clearly went well because Ned is currently in the middle of a mammoth tour. There are still a few dates left. See bikeology.co.uk for more information. We will hear a few clips from the show in this podcast. But without further ado, here's Orla.
I'm at Herne Hill velodrome in South London on a rather lovely, pleasant September morning. I'm here for one of the midweek track sessions. Every Wednesday and Thursday morning they have racing sessions for veterans and women. These events are a rather famous part of the London cycling scene. Herne Hill, of course, an historical, legendary venue in the fabric and history of London cycling. This is where Sir Bradley Wiggins came to learn his craft when he was that kid from Kilburn that he likes to talk about. It's all a far cry from the shining, gleaming monument of cycling that is the London velodrome a few miles away in Stratford, built for the London Olympics. There it's all about, well, it's a testament really to the modernity and the technology, everything that's bright and shiny about track cycling. Here, no gleaming boards. It's a concrete track, although it's a bit of an improvement on the gravel track that we had until a few years ago. I'm sitting on the concrete steps just outside the brand new pavilion. So a bit of an improvement on what it used to be, but certainly it would be the spit and sawdust venue of London track cycling, except it's open air, so both spit and sawdust would be washed away in the rain. But I'm here this morning to have a little chat to another legendary institution of British cycling. I'm sure you won't mind me saying, Ned Boulting. And this is where he comes to fuel his passion for cycling and get his cleats dirty of a midweek. And I just want to chat to him about, well, all things cycling, broadcast, media. Ned has been on the Cycling Podcast a few times, of course, in the past, but as a fellow broadcaster, I've always been, well, watching his career with interest, I guess, as I come up from behind. And I'm fascinated by the different strands of his career, which have taken a new twist of late. So I'm going to watch Ned as he pushes through the pain barrier and have a chat to him a little bit later.
And then, with about 7 kilometres to go, you really are only reduced to the big team leaders and the big primary favourites and their strong mountain lieutenants. There's only about 30 riders left at this point. With 6k to go, TJ Van Garderen gets dropped. And then, with about 3 kilometres to go, that's the moment that Dan Martin always chooses to attack. And it lasts about a minute, and then he's caught again, and he goes out the back, and then suddenly you've only got about 4 or 5, 6 riders at the most, and one of them isn't Contador, because he's a bit older, and he's a bit cleaner, and he eats a bit less steak than he used to. And so, you've only got Fabiano, Romain Bardet, Rigoberto Urán, but Chris Froome, and they contest the final of this mountaintop finish, and it is immense, and I love a climbing stage.
So unfortunately, the brand new lovely pavilion at Herne Hill isn't open today, so we've relocated down the road to a lovely cafe in Dulwich. How did you find that this morning, Ned? You were dreading it by all accounts.
It's just so hard. You look around, you think we're all blokes in our 40s, and and a few women, and the women are by far the strongest riders, really, in that group. And you look around, and you think he looks so numpty. he looks like he's an accountant. He looks like this, that and the other. And a lot of them I know, and you think, how fast can he be? I mean, he's not going to be... And but then it comes back to that amazing thing that's very deceptive about cycling at any level, in that it's all relative. Unlike any other sport, I've never been any good at tennis. I've got no hand-eye coordination. Darts I play a bit, and I'm hopeless at it. So I know quantifiably how bad I am at darts and tennis and all those things that require actual skill. Like that. So, but the cycling, because 9/10 of it is just turning the pedals, it lulls you into that sort of sense of, I'm cracking on here, I'm kind of like, I reckon, it's that whole thing about, I reckon I could probably put me in the middle of the Tour de France peloton in an average, probably hold my own, and of course nothing could be further from the truth. But because it's not obvious, it always, your mind plays tricks on you, and it played tricks on me this morning. And where I used to occasionally finish third or even second or even won a race a couple of years ago, now I'm solid 20th. It's quite humbling because it's going to be a long way back from there.
Is there a way back?
No. No, just a slow slide towards the grave, ever slower. And what I'm dreading is now, because this session has become, it used to be just Wednesday mornings, the 3 R's, right? They explained, rich, redundant and retired. It used to be just Wednesday mornings, quite famously, but become so popular over the last couple of years. I mean, literally the numbers have swollen, so they can't accommodate everyone now. They split it into a faster group on a Wednesday and a slower group on a Thursday. And now I'm hovering between Wednesday and Thursday, and I'm just holding on to the Wednesday group like that. And I know that I'm going to have to switch to Thursdays eventually, and that's just, I might as well just...
And then I was trying to start on the Thursday.
Yeah, but if you start there, that's all right. You can aim for the Wednesday group, aim for the stars. But I started in the Wednesday group. I'm like, I'm just dropping down the divisions. It's awful.
Do they all know you as Ned Boulting off the telly?
Yeah, I mean, they do. Bless them, they're a nice bunch, but they do pick their moments to kind of pick you up on the pronunciation of some Belgian rider, or tell me that I got some hopeless call wrong on the Tour de Yorkshire or something like that, and they'll pick that kind of 5 laps into a 10-lap scratch race just to ride up alongside me and put me right. What can we save this conversation for another time? But they're just a lovely bunch. They're just nice folk, and cycling suffers across the board from a lack of diversity, I think, in terms of its demographic. And that's true of this group a little bit. But actually, if you drill beneath the surface a bit, there are some fascinating biographies there. And some, it's mixed up with newbies like myself. I'd still put myself in that category. And people who have been coming down there. There's the old boy Roger, he's in his 70s. He's been coming down there for decades. And grew up in Dartford, I think, Roger. And so, yeah, it kind of like, it's the past and the present of cycling come together in that group, actually. It's good.
You'd still put yourself in the newbie category. Is that because you came to the sport in a very publicly outsider way? Will you ever see yourself as anything else?
No, because I know that I've been kind of involved in this sport now for 15 years, which I suppose is quite a chunk of time. But even 20 years from now, if we're still having this, touch wood, I'm still here and we're having this conversation, I'd still consider myself a newbie because of the particularity of the time in which I suddenly became involved in the sport. And the reason I think it resonates with people is because a lot of people in the Anglophone world, and particularly in the UK, made the same discovery at the same time. And so that's a marked point in the development of cycling in this country where everything changed, I think, for better and for worse. Certainly got bigger in certain respects, other little bits shrunk, but there was a paradigm shift at that particular point, and it just so happened that's when I parachuted in. And so that is the new cycling, would like it or not, and actually I kind of rail against it, but that's the point at which I joined, so I will always be a newbie, I think. Do you see what I'm getting at?
Yeah, completely, because I came in later than you did, but
just a few years, yeah.
Just a few years later, and I always feel like an interloper. It's slightly different for me because I don't get to be as involved in the sport as you do, but I always feel like I will always be someone from the outside. For me, I find a sense of regret about that. Do you? Do you regret that you can't wear those old school badges and flaunt your stripes from years and years ago, or does it matter anymore?
I completely know what you mean. I do resent it almost and regret it. It doesn't make much sense, does it? It's illogical because, things always happened before your time. That's kind of the nature of the chronology of the world. It's quite basic. But it kind of particularly applies to cycling. And, weirdly ending... I remember when I was first approached about switching my role and going into commentating and replacing Phil Liggett, which was a huge decision that I had to take. One of my real reservations, and they were multiple reservations, it took years for them to persuade me, was precisely that point. How can I claim to have the history and the heritage? How can I, when we go up Pralou, how can I claim to draw down on the memories of Merckx that I've only ever read about or looked up on YouTube? That says there's something bogus about that. I don't think I should beat myself up about it, but nonetheless there's an inherent sort of like uncomfortable thing about dipping into someone else's history, because those, I'm very, very aware of the fact that I'm still broadcasting and you're still broadcasting to a block of people for whom this was their childhood, this was second nature to them, and it's not the case with me. So I don't know, insult or tread on their memories and impinge on that side of it. However, with each passing year, when I talk about, let's pluck a name at random, the Carlos Sastre Tour de France win, and Alpe d'Huez and the Schleck brothers and Cadel Evans, that's my history. I do remember that, and I remember being there and I remember talking to the riders afterwards, and year on year, as that past telescopes back again, you look at the pictures of, 2008, wasn't it? And even now, it feels so recent, but actually watch those footage now and it feels like already that's a bygone era. And so, the layers of history sort of pile up very quickly, don't they? And so I guess that kind of that feeling of being a slight imposter will diminish as time goes by, but never entirely leave me, I don't think.
There is that snobbery in any sport, I think, but I hesitate to say particularly in cycling, but it is one that is completely steeped in history. But we do have a responsibility, I feel, as well, to bring new fans to the sport. And so is it not a good thing maybe sometimes as well that you have an awareness of what that feels like, to have that imposter syndrome, but to welcome and embrace the new fans to the sport at the same time? I mean,
it's something that I've been taught to be very conscious of, working particularly on the Tour de France, and I have to say particularly for a free-to-air channel like ITV, that just by the nature of being a free-to-air channel attracts the biggest audience. It's always been drummed into me since I first joined the team that we have a twin responsibility that often conflicts. One is not to insult the initiated, but on the other hand, always to extend a welcoming hand to what is a very complex and arcane sport to the viewers. Year on year, that has the kinds of questions that I would have normally grappled with by first-time viewers seem to have changed in nature. I mean, for years and years when I started, going back to 2003, 4, 5, 6, the Armstrong years, and then the subsequent years after that, the one question that would always get asked would be, if Mark Cavendish is so fast, why doesn't he win the Tour de France? Which is a silly question, but also it's an entirely understandable question. And it actually took me years to be able to very quickly answer it, because I used to have to think, it's a good question, why is that? But people don't ask that anymore. That has stopped being a question that's being asked. You still get questions that every now and again I'm asked that really take me aback, and I think, crikey, there are still people for whom this is a complete foreign language. And that's a good wake-up call, actually. Oddly, I think there have, when I first started to commentate, one of the criticisms that came my way occasionally was that I was too technical, too engrossed in the minutiae of tactics and team, the way that the race was actually being ridden, and actually didn't talk enough about the basics. Possibly because I was trying to prove to myself that I was worthy of calling a race. But, I do need to be aware that if you watch a bike race for the first time, you have not the faintest idea what's going on. So I have to replay from my first experience of bike, I did not know what was going on from start to finish. And it took years for me to even begin to understand it, really.
Are we doing a better job of explaining that now? Because it is something that any of my friends or family who don't share my passion for the sport, that their argument is always, I just don't get it. I just don't... They'll watch a bike race and they'll watch hours of, well, they won't watch it. They would see hours of just men
pedaling.
More now women, thankfully, but just pedaling and pedaling and pedaling.
Yeah. Well, a bit of that's true, right?
Yeah, it
is. That is kind of true.
Some part of me wonders, well, is that entirely the responsibility of the broadcaster to explain everything, or is it just, you're either sucked in by the sport or you're not?
I think you need that extending hand of welcome to say, actually, you think that's just a bunch of people. So, working with a co-commentator, and again I come back to my change of role, because I made it very clear that there was only one guy I was interested in working with as a co-commentator, and that was David Miller. And his retirement, his forced retirement, coincided with my change of role, and that kind of worked for me, because I knew that Miller, who has been my entire education in the Tour de France, in cycling, from the very first day I ever went to a bike race where he slipped his chain and yellow jumper and should have won the and all that. That was David Miller. A year later, he was busted. 2 years. Okay, right, doping. Right, what's that all about? Right. Then coming back from doping and the anti-doping and the trying to race and win clean. Then the formation of Team Sky and him being on the outside, and then retirement. I've seen the whole entire arc of a career, for better or worse, played out with him. Now working alongside him as a co-commentator, one of the things that he's taught me to do is watch a bike race. Actually watch a bike. For the first time now, I'm watching a bike race. I've spent decades watching a bike race, but until you have to call it, I'm now watching it in high definition, in a way that, so if you think of a classic Moto2 shot of the front of the peloton, 80 kilometres out, Sky are on the front for the sake of argument, could be Quick-Step, whoever, with one or two riders on the front, like a Julien Vermotte doing that endlessly long shift. Now, I've stopped looking at Julien Vermotte, because what I'm interested in now is in what Katusha are doing, 7 or 8 wheels down, why they've suddenly sent 2 riders up just to sit on the wheels of... Do you know what? Because that's where the race is happening. And why are you just seeing Team Lotto and El Jumbo moving to the back? Like, why have they... Hang on, what are those 4 riders just dropping off the back for? And that's where the race is actually happening. And all of that passed me by before. I just wasn't watching it. I realised I wasn't watching it.
And in your defence, I would say that as someone who's had to report on it on location as well, it is incredibly difficult to fit in any bike race watching while you're doing TV. I mean, I always find myself at a massive disadvantage from anyone watching at home, because they are sat in front of the sofa listening to an interpretation of the race for hours, whereas you have been running around like a headless chicken, trying to film links, trying to organise things, trying to get lunch, trying to go to the toilet.
Yeah.
And actually, you don't get to watch very much of a bike race when you're at a race.
You are, when you and I both worked on the finish line at the Tour de France, you are uniquely disadvantaged. Like, the entire cycling world is better informed than you. And at that given moment, you're the one with the microphone who has to ask the cogent question. And no one is worse informed than you. It's remarkable, isn't it? But what are the sporting events? So quite often, you'll have experienced this. You'll ask a rider who you're interviewing who's not won the race or done anything, but you're just interviewing them anyway, and you'll throw in a question about the winner. Mm-hmm. And they'll go, did he win? I don't know. And they've taken a part in a sporting event that they, A, don't know the outcome of, and B, don't care. Because if it isn't their teammate, why are they bothered?
It's like
when
they
Mark
haven't
Cavendish,
watched him win, they've been on their bikes.
They haven't got the faintest idea what's happening. And you'll ask Cavendish, what happened when, did you see so-and-so? So a classic example is when you ask, when I've seen this, a mistake I no longer make, I hesitate to it, but I've seen people do it, and when I see them do it, I go, no, this isn't going to end well. A mountain stage, and you're interviewing Mark Cavendish about Chris Froome's attack. And he'll look at you witheringly and go, what, because, what... Yeah, they're not in the same race, so why would he give us stuff? And he doesn't know. So, but I mean, it's nuts, isn't it, cycling? There's so much ignorance, and so much of what happens in a bike race, even when it's as well covered as the Tour de France is just below the waterline, you just don't know what's gone on because the cameras have missed it, and But yeah, you're right, and even I'm very conscious, even when I'm commentating, that there are people at home who are better informed than me. Even though I've got a laptop open, I've got connection to the internet, I've got a monitor, I'm still just watching the telly like everyone else is, but I'm also charged with talking all the time and broadcasting pretty much all the time. So it's kind of, I can't just say, hold on a minute, just give me 5 minutes here while I research your facts. Just let me think. Right, everyone just stop. Stop what you're doing, because something quite complicated's gone on and I need to just find out this thing, all right? So just bear with me. Like that. Well, but people at home are doing that because they're not commentating, and they are picking up on the smallest mistake. And listen, mistakes are absolutely inevitable. You've got the 198 different biographies, different Palmares, different things, and like that, and it's all happening in the blink of an eye with a wobbly camera shot. You're never going to be perfect at that. You do your best.
Did you have stock questions and thinking back to the finish line when you've no idea what's happening?
Yes.
You're the person with the microphone. You know everyone at home has their burning question to ask, and you're thinking, oh God, let me just say something coherent. Did you have stock questions when you had no idea?
What a race! or if he's an Italian in the mix zone. Una bella vittoria. Una bella vittoria.
Except if you're doing that to Mark Cavendish, it gives you that withering look again, because he expects a question, not a statement.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
So you can't even get away with the generic statement.
In the latter years, the Cavendish, they started winning in 2008. I was fortunate in that I used to just interview him when he'd won, which is okay. It was okay because he'd won, and he'd do his usual thing about thanking his teammates and then going through minute detail the last couple of kilometres and all that sort of thing. So it was all right. It was always okay. We used to send Matt Rendell to go and interview when he lost.
Poor Matt.
So I got away with that. But I remember all in 2003, I wrote about it actually in the Yellow Jumper book, in my first Tour de France. There was a stage into Marseille where a breakaway of 2 stayed away. And I can't remember who the other guy was, but there's a Danish rouleur for a CSC team called Jakob Piel. He was a track racer, really, but he was just making up the numbers. And he and an Italian rider, I think, suddenly with about sort of 2 or 3k to go, realised they had a big enough advantage. And they sat up, shook hands, and then had a sprint like that. It was quite nice. I remember it was quite clearly. But we were all, because it was just one of those sleepy days, it's 35 degrees. And back in those days, it really was. The finish line was just unrestricted chaos. All the camera crews were in one great big clump, waiting for these 2 riders to come in. And then there was going to be a 10-minute gap until the peloton came in with Armstrong and everyone else. So anyway, this guy, Jakob Piel, won this 2-up sprint and came hurtling over the finish line and stopped right in front of me. I mean, literally right in front of me. At that point, right, the entire swarm of media just came like that and just like bunched around me. And because Jakob Piel and fate had chosen me, like that, everybody, and there was no Danish broadcaster there who we would have otherwise deferred to, the entire media circus of the Tour de France, on my first Tour de France, deferred to me to ask Jakob Piel the question, right? And I felt enormous pressure, and I could hear in my ear our director, because he could see from the finish line camera from French television what was happening, and they were just killing themselves in the truck waiting for my go on, what are you going to ask him, Ned? And he took his helmet off and he looked me in the eye, and everyone looked at me, and I just went, Jakob, you won. And I just thought the absolute absurdity of this thing. I had no idea what he said, and everyone just looked at me like, who is this idiot? And I remember the next day, Jakob Piel, I remember just catching a glimpse of him wandering around his hotel, because we were there they were staying in the same hotel as Jan Ullrich and the T-Mobile team. And I looked at this guy and I went, Christ, I recognise him. Who's he? Like that. And someone said, isn't that the bloke who won yesterday? And I went, yeah, what was his name? And he was a total chip paper. Like, he was suddenly the centre of the sporting universe for like 30 seconds. And then the following day, no one could remember that Jakob Piel had won the stage into Marseille.
Isn't that what's so difficult as well, though, about broadcasting in cycling? Or is it just me and a terrible memory? But if you go from football, for example, which was your sport to begin with, there's a team who wins and a team who loses. Yeah. There are 11 players on a pitch, on one team, obviously, 22 altogether. With cycling, you've got a spotlight shone on so many different stories on any one given day that become huge. And then the next day it moves on and it's something different, and it's a new location and it's a new mountain, and you've got the 198 riders going with it. To be able to have that frame of reference whereby you're going back and remembering what one rider did and putting things into historical context, I find incredibly difficult in cycling. Is that just me?
No, it isn't just you. I mean, it's infinitely detailed, isn't it? And, you can never know everything. You know what interests you, you look for the stuff that interests you. I mean, it is interesting when you're coming to do, I do a lot of commentary for Italian races throughout the year, like Tirreno Adriatico, the Tour of the Alps. It used to be called Trentino, and often the start list there is packed with Italian pro-continental teams, and I know like 2 or 3 quite well of the riders, might be 4 or 5 I've literally never heard of. So you do what research you can on the internet, and you look at that, and they are kind of young riders just starting out, or they're journeymen, and you kind of look at their results down the years, and it is next to meaningless, because they, you just look at what they've achieved every year. They took part in that race and they finished 123rd, 86th, 57th, 89th. What does this guy do? How am I going to... So when he gets in a breakaway, what can I say about him? He's a person who finishes 89th normally, and he comes from Milan. But, there will be a story there, but it's not that. So, for 9/10 of the time, 99% of the peloton is anonymous. It's like you say, they're just kind of like there, they roll over, they do their job, they catch their paycheck at the end of the, what a bizarre sport. You're so right. It's just breathtaking, the detail.
The Cycling Podcast is supported by Science in Sport. Science in Sport. Fueled by science.
Thank you to Science and Sport for sponsoring the Cycling Podcast, and a reminder that you're entitled to 20% off your world-leading sports nutrition products at scienceandsport.com. Just enter the code CPAUG20 at the checkout.
You mentioned the chaos of the TV side of things back in the day when you started. How have you seen the media circus grow, change, evolve or not since you started, would you say?
Yeah, I mean, it has changed dramatically, and I have to say not for the better. I think that, I might have misremembered this, but I think when I first started, the only Tour de France team to have a press officer, and he wasn't really a press officer, he was just a bloke, was obviously Armstrong's team. He was a guy called Yogi Muller, I think, and he used to be, his primary job was to take pictures of the media so that they could pore over the pictures later, and Armstrong could point at certain faces and go, him, not him, him and not him. And then, they had Serge, his bodyguard, and every other rider in the peloton was up for grabs. You could just grab them in a hotel, at the finish line, on the start, wherever you wanted to. It was all, access all areas. Knock on hotel room doors, used to do that. Obviously, the days of the list being, occasionally teams still do that, don't they? You kind of laugh at them when they do, Fortuné Oscano, what are you doing? Oh, you're doing that because no one wants to interview Brice Fayou. Exactly. So it doesn't really matter. There's something quite sweet about that. But, even US Postal used to do that back in the day. And certainly, the days of, I can't remember last time I saw a rider in the start village. That's a shame, and it used to be commonplace. I remember Bradley Wiggins, regularly getting haircuts in 2006, 2007 at the start village. Miller always used to be there, reading his newspaper. Pipe. Cap of some description,
Of course.
Probably wearing jodhpurs.
Bicycle clips.
Yeah. So that's changed. I don't think that's brilliant, is it? Because now you have you're told that it's become like football. To some extent, okay, so Dave is coming out. Don't ask him about this. Sorry? You must have had that. This is out of bounds today.
Yeah.
Is it? And you just have to suck it up, don't you? Because if you say no, it's not, you won't get the interview. Sky particularly controlling, but they're not alone. I mean, I think there are other teams that are equally bad. And every rider now, because the buses are so luxurious, every rider... And it's a self-perpetuating thing because they look at their senior riders and the younger riders are impressionable and do what the senior riders do. Because the senior riders don't go out until the last minute and avoid doing as many interviews, get away with as few as they possibly can, or none, ideally. That's what the younger riders have learned, that kind of behaviour. So all the riders pile out of the buses to sign on at the very last minute. So if you go to the start head of a big... I don't do this job anymore. Daniel Freeb does on the ITV thing. But if your producer says, have a word with Contador, get Nibali, get Chavez, and get Froome. You can't. You used to be able to because you used to get, just go and knock on the door of the bus and sort of say, you can have a word with him. And now you can't. You'll have to decide which of the one you prioritise and then hope you get him. And the other, major difference is it's become English speaking. And that's been very, very quick. And so I suppose it should be something for an English-speaking audience I shouldn't begrudge and we should celebrate because it gives us a better idea, maybe, if we're not blessed with foreign... You speak languages. Most of the journalists speak languages. I've always been quite impressed with that, actually, in the cycling coverage. But for the audience who maybe don't have the languages, maybe it's nice to hear these riders speak in English. But for me, I think it's... just takes some of the romance away from the event,
When you say about the relationship and the growth, I guess, of press officers, so the relationship that's changed between us and the teams, I guess they would say that is something that's necessitated by an increase in professionalism for a start. It has become more global, it's become bigger. There are more of us on the journalist side of things, and that they would say they need to control it. I mean, I remember trying to get a shot of Richie Porte warming up for the time trial at the start of this year's Tour de France, and we went over towards the team bus and we were told, no, your slot for filming him was 10 minutes ago. And I'm like, well, there's a slot for filming someone in a public car park. I didn't realise, I didn't get that particular carrier pigeon message. I assumed we could film whenever we wanted. But that's their way, they would say, of Richie concentrating and not being distracted. Is there an answer to that? You know, has it just become a beast of its own making, really, where it's fed into itself, and now, well, yes, of course, we are going to be extra frantic because you're only giving us 10 minutes, so then we will be a distraction to Richard Porte as he's warming up, and you will need to control that, and it becomes self-fulfilling.
Well, I mean, you'd have to ask the riders, wouldn't you? I'm not well enough placed, but I mean, no, the problem is no rider is going to say, I think you should have more access. That's not going to happen. But it's self-perpetuating, isn't it? And they look at each other and they look at, and I have to say, Team Sky are right at the forefront of this, because they were the people who turned up and put the screens up. In front of you, talk about warming up for time trials. They were the ones who invented that kind of exclusion zone. They've set the tone, and everyone else has followed. It's hard to argue against, because of course they're trying to protect their riders. Does it make for a better product? No. I mean, if we're in the entertainment business, which they are removing themselves from the public step by step and bit by bit.
Do you think they realise the danger of that at this stage? Because footballers, again, to go back to that sport, can afford to remove themselves from the public because they are so huge and there is so much money and attention on them anyway. Cycling doesn't have that luxury, does it? Well,
some cycling doesn't. I mean, the thing is, Team Sky, I'm sorry to go on and on about them, but it is they do happen to win the Grand Tours a lot, and they do happen to win the big one more than anyone else. They don't really care because their sponsor is only interested in winning the Tour de France, and everything else is secondary, and they do that very well. So they can sacrifice everything else to that altar. If you drop down to, if you like, slightly needier sponsors, like let's go right down to 1-2 Group Gobert. I don't even know what 1-2 Group do. Do you know?
No, I have no idea.
I don't know, but I would imagine they would be enormously amenable to you. Kind of like, they'd be so flattered if you turned up and said, I want to do something amazing with Frederick Backett. I want to have breakfast with Frederick Backett and talk to him about... Yeah, and so it's interesting, isn't it? It's the cart before the horse and the horse before the cart. Some of the lesser teams, you drop right down to continental domestic. I do a lot of kind of domestic cycling in the UK, have done for years. There, the sponsors couldn't be more helpful and happy, and they're just interested in exposure. And that's the old cycling model, isn't it? Where that's why they're in it. So they're trying to maximise their, but Sky don't need that. I don't think so. I don't know what the answer is, but I do know it's changed. When I started off, it was a rough and ready place. The mixed zone, as it was. I mean, there must have been barriers there, like cattle herding barriers that there are now. But if there were, I can't really remember them. It didn't feel like that. It felt like every day we were in the middle of the most almighty rugby scrum, And there was no bigger name in world sport, not in cycling, in world sport, than Lance Armstrong at the time, and he was, at the centre of this firestorm. And it wasn't. There was this perception as well that, in the years of kind of those tainted years of Omerta and no one daring to upset the apple cart, there's a lot of truth to that, but it wasn't always that way, and people did challenge Armstrong repeatedly, and so it could be a feisty place where difficult questions were asked and dealt with and answered, and people fell out and words were exchanged. And actually, I know I ridicule him and everything. Well, I don't ridicule him, for heaven's sake, but I know I poke fun at Mark Cavendish's moodiness, but Cavendish has a bit of that combativity that I think, he might be the last of the angry riders to some extent, and it needs a bit of that. He didn't care about his PR, does he? I mean, he does on the one hand.
He does.
I know, and he cares massively about his image,
yeah.
But he's incapable of kind of manipulating himself to do the right thing, really, because the chimp will out,
Which is what's wonderful. I think he cares, as you say, massively about his image, but his fire takes over. He can't help it.
He can't help
control himself. The chimp's out of the cage before he can even find the key.
I mean, you've seen repeatedly press officers who've worked with Mark Cavendish just give up, haven't you? They just go, oh, whatever, because whatever happens here, I'm going to get it.
Yeah. I had his press officer was agent in Rio say to me, I'm going to have to stop you from doing interviews with him, Orla, because he gets too relaxed. He just lets go, and I can't control him. I'm like, well, that's the beauty of it. Thank you very much. But what is it then that sucked you in about cycling to begin with? It was a sport that you had no idea about.
That's beautiful.
You find your passion through work, like me, and I've got my own theories as to what makes it so attractive to an outsider.
Right.
What was it for you?
I mean, it's beautiful because the stadium is the open road, and that open road can be first bike race I ever saw. I think I'm right in saying it started near the Palais Royal, crossed the River Seine, took in the Eiffel Tower, and finished alongside the Invalides. That's
quite a first race.
That's okay. That's where this sporting event is happening. And the next day, I think, produced the most almighty pile-up in a bunch sprint I've ever seen, where Jimmy Casper lost half his arse. And I thought, okay, so yesterday was beautiful and dramatic. Today's just unbelievably savage. And you're gonna carry on tomorrow with half an arse? It blew my mind. It blew my mind. And I remember seeing him. I remember seeing that even like day 2 of my experience of cycling. This French rider who I'd never heard of. Funnily enough, I had dinner with him on the Tour de France this year because he rides the motorbike that hands out the Vittel bottles. Anyway, Jimmy Casper, and I was reminding him of the day he lost half his arse, and he didn't need or want reminding. But I remember he was doing an interview live on French television that evening with like half his arse hanging off, and like little bits of swab and bandage just kind of ever so gingerly placed over this open wound. And I'd assumed he should have been in hospital. He started and he finished that Tour de France, I think. What else do I need to say? It was so different from any other sport I'd ever covered, any experience I'd ever had. And that was just the beginning. Then I started to concentrate on the race. And then, even a kind of like basic understanding of the tactics and what is actually happening. It's just beautiful. It's just an insanely engrossing feast for the eyes, isn't it? And then to actually be able to rub shoulders with these people in their hyper-normality. You see them doing these extraordinary things, and then you meet them and they're just blokes. They're just really normal, and he's just having... And you're in the same hotel, and he's just sitting there eating his cornflakes, about to go and race up an Alp.
Because they say never to get close to your heroes,
yeah.
and maybe hero even is the wrong word. And we were talking earlier about whether riding at Herne Hill demystified in any way the romance of it. But is there an element of actually seeing that hypernormality, as you call it? Does that actually help to mythologise it even more so?
Yeah, it does. I mean, I think they're tremendous. Even perhaps the least articulate rider is able, to my mind, to articulate the grandeur of their sport. Even like an Ian Stannard, bless him, he's just a lovely, kind of honest, straightforward bloke. Even he, when you kind of like see those shots of him coming over the line, he takes off and he's losing all his hair now, bless him, isn't he? Kind of like the helmet comes off and he's got mud all over his face and you can see it in his eye. And even though he's not blessed with the widest vocabulary, when he says stuff in the heat of the moment, you kind of go, yeah, no, I can totally see what I can see what you've been through. I'm a million miles away from it, but I get it. And there's no one more normal in the world than Ian Stannard, but what he does is completely abnormal, and it's that kind of extraordinary disparity between the two halves of their lives that is beguiling, I think,
And you mentioned that heat of the moment, which is still something that we are blessed with being able to be a part of in cycling compared to other more structured sports where they're in a certain arena and you're kept your distance. We do get to shove a microphone in faces in the most brutal moments of suffering or immediately afterwards. I guess recently I've been struck by social media interpretations of those heat of the moment statements, and I'm just interested to know what you think about social media and how that's affected our relationship with riders and teams in the sport, because it feels like we want our riders to be raw and pure and honest, and yet they can be pulled apart when they speak from the heart in the moment. But what else? What's the alternative?
Yeah, you're very right. I mean, there are very few exceptions. Riders do look at social media, I think, and some of them obsess over it. And I think they're right to be very, very wary of it, because it's a bear pit. I mean, I'm not a rider. I'm a broadcaster and a writer, occasionally a journalist. I'm in that kind of camp. But I very rarely express an opinion on controversies that rage around the social media, because I have opinions, but that's not the forum I'm going to even kind of... Because you can't... Everyone just lines up and screams at each other. It's an insane place it's not the place for rational debate. Face to face, talking things through, that's the place to, where you can't put yourself in someone else's shoes in social media. You just have to line up one way or the other. And it does my head in. And I completely get what you're saying. I would be... we just had a really great example on the Vuelta, haven't we? On the rest day, Nicky Terpstra said something quite daft on Instagram. There was a little hint of kind of like disrespectful, possibly, European racism attached to it, just a sniff of that was a bit uncomfortable. There was a bad joke about terrorism attached to it. where he called the Colombian team Manza Posta Bomb when he was getting on a plane. Let's just leave it at that. It wasn't a particularly funny joke, but it wasn't the worst thing in the world. Oh my God, the moral guardians of our online universe, just jumped on him. So he ain't going to be posting anything remotely, in inverted commas, amusing anytime soon on the internet, is he? So that we've lost another kind of spark of interest there. It was a bloody stupid thing to say, but honestly, that's all it was.
Because it was lovely to begin with, I find, with social media, that you did feel like, we're talking about the press officers, we had a direct access to the riders and we could hear their thoughts. And this is common across all sports and all walks of life.
Yeah.
But remember when Bradley Wiggins was considering leaving Garmin and going to Team Sky, or he wasn't considering it as far as the public were aware, he was denying it, but then tweeted that he'd gone to the beach because he had serious thinking to do. Yeah. And that caused a whole storm amongst the teams to say, what are you doing? And letting people know that you're considering moving teams. And of course, Bradley Wiggins doesn't tweet anymore, and Mark Cavendish doesn't really tweet anymore, and all these people who were wonderful firecrackers on social media just aren't there anymore. I mean, that's almost a shame that we've got this huge, deafening arena of noise from a camp of Twitter warriors and not so much from people we want to hear from, isn't it?
Yeah. And of course, what you're forgetting is Kath Wiggins and Michelle.
Oh, yeah.
And Latu Swir, which was probably Twitter's apotheosis. They should have just packed the network up, so we can't do better than that. It was when Peter Cavendish came in and went, well, both of you, what did she say? Just go and sort this out with handbags or something like that.
Something like that,
just diffused, came in brilliantly and won that, hands down. No, you're right. You're right. Well, I mean, all I can say, what hasn't changed, is the reality of what motivates these riders, what drives their lives, what frustrates them, what angers them, and all that sort of thing. That's all still there. And all I can say is, instead of sitting on your ass, kind of like trawling Twitter and watching bike racing from afar, get stuck in. And the next time a bike race is anywhere near your hometown or you can get there, just go and meet these people up close and personal. Don't go, if you go to the Tour de France, don't go to a finish line because you won't see anything really. Go to a start village and don't go and wait outside the Team Sky bus so you can be one of the 200 people there shouting through me into the ether. Go pick the smallest rider on the smallest, pick Zach Dempster and go and just shake his hand and wish him all the best and ask him how yesterday was, and then you'll get a flavour of what bike racing is all about, and those people are still there and they're still real and they still will be flattered that the attention and the respect that you show them, because my God, it's a hard profession. It is most of the time. It's just a shitty job for most of the riders, and it's honestly, it's not particularly well rewarded for most of the riders either. And every day I turn, when I'm commentating, turn to David and say, wish you were out there, and he just goes, no. And especially when it comes to time trialling, which is his discipline.
Now the next kind of stage is an individual time trial. So here's what I think about time trialling. I think they should do it in private. And then when they're done, just email everyone the results of the fun. I'm joking, not joking. So, individual time trial, that leaves just one. It's quite similar to an individual time trial. A team time trial has the added benefit of being over quite quicker. Especially if you're a Europe car, normally at the first bend it's over.
Hi, I'm Darius. I head up Rapha Travel, which is our cycling holidays business, and I've been here 10 months. Rapha Travel organises cycling holidays all over the world of varying difficulties, varying lengths. The place that really caught me by surprise was LA. One of our staff who is based out there took us for a ride, and we went from the centre of Santa Monica up into the hills in about 20 minutes, and you could have been hundreds of miles from the city. We really focus on making experiences that guests just couldn't organise by themselves, and whether that's going to factories or going to local producers, those are the things that you could only do if you came with us.
The Rapha Cycling Club is the largest global community of its kind. Members share their passion for the road through rides, events, exclusive club kits and racing. Find out more at rapha.cc.
How do you find then the commentating side of it? It's so very different in terms of a daily job compared to reporting. The reporting, you're running around, you're in the field, you're in the thick of it. Your job is to give us as viewers access to the riders and the stories. And now you are that level removed like the viewers and not necessarily in the action.
Yeah.
Although I have to say, since you started commentating, I still see you at the team presentations, for example, at the start of the Tour de France, where we're all heralded in the media pen and we get our little chance to chat to the riders. You're still there without a microphone, without a camera, but just there sort of sucking it all up. And I saw you this year and just thought you looked like a little boy full of wonder looking at these riders and eavesdropping is what they were saying. You still love that.
So there's a few things there. One is I'm looking at riders' kneecaps. And I'm looking at kneecaps and elbows, hair, sideburns, earrings, tattoos. I'm going, who are you? Honestly, because identifying riders is so central too. So I'm looking for distinctive little marks.
Have you ever identified a rider in the peloton by his kneecaps?
Possibly not kneecaps, but elbows most certainly. Yeah. All that sort of thing. It's just so that's part of what I'm doing. And the other thing, all of that's really, really important in my job, and it comes back to this kind of like the fans know better thing, is that you can research a rider who you don't know personally. Some riders I know personally, many I don't. But, most of the time you're drawing down information that's freely accessible to everybody in the world, right? So how do you make that distinctive? How do you kind of impart distinctive and exclusive knowledge? There's only one way, and that's to grab the rider, introduce yourself and talk to them. I remember doing that with, riders like Petr Vakoč, and just get to know them a bit. And you find out stuff that no one knows because there's no online trace of it. And that, whether or not it's worth anything in the grand scheme of things, my God, I haven't found penicillin here. This is not adding to the sum of human knowledge, but it gives me, when I'm commentating, a sense of purpose that actually I am imparting something you may not know now here. And there's only one way of doing that, and that's still that face-to-face kind of interaction. So I do a bit of that. You say when I was reporting I was in the thick of it. I never really felt like that. I know what you mean. But I actually think commentating puts me in the thick of it. Even though I'm just watching telly and I'm not actually meeting the riders during the day, what I do feel now is intensely attached to the actual event in a way that I wasn't. Because in my contribution to the broadcast used to be either before the race started or after the race finished. So I was bookending the actual event. And now I am spontaneously and within a split second having to call the event, and that's kind of very, very different, much more engaged, I think. I remember watching when I was getting ready to commentate, and I knew that the next year I would be commentating on the Tour de France. I was standing at the Espace Presse, just past the finish line, where that little zone where they put up television cameras for the media to sit and watch the final few kilometres of the race or stand there. And I was just kind of watching around, I was just mumbling to myself names of riders as they it's one of those really hard stages to call where there's a little climb just before the finish line, and you get riders just firing off and you've got to go, Christ, who's that? That's his NXT bar. And you go like that, and I'm kind of like mumbling to myself names of riders, and I suddenly became aware I was standing next to Jeremy Whittle. And he was going, what are you doing? And I'm just trying to name like that and pick it up there. And he goes, that's so true. He said, I haven't got a clue who any of these riders are.
Yeah.
And you're getting some of them, right? And I say, well, I've got to know now. And he said, Jeremy said, he's a writer, I've never stopped and thought about that, because I know my cycling, but I've always had time after they cross the finish line to absorb what's gone on, and I've never not identified a rider because it's distilled down, and I kind of so there's a level of attention that is just surpasses anything that I ever had to have as a reporter, where I always had time. I always knew who I was talking to, Does that make sense? I haven't explained that very well.
Completely, yeah, because the level of scrutiny it would terrify me because you are the voice of interpretation of the race, and so your call matters.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of scrutiny.
I think you've got to be honest. If you don't know, you've got to be honest. You can't. Yeah, there's no point in bluffing. People will see through that straight away. The hardest stages of all are those, a bit like a Milan-San Remo, where you've got a selective climb just a few kilometres from the finish line, and it's all over in a trice. Once they get over the top of that climb, there are very few minutes before there will be a group sprint of sorts, but you don't know who's in the group for sure, do you? You might, okay, that's definitely him, but there's 25 other guys. All the main sprinters have been dropped, and most of the climbers aren't there, so it's like all the guys in the middle of the spectrum, right, who are neither extremely that or nor extremely that, who you don't normally see.
Stand out.
You don't normally see contesting the sharp end of a race, and it's them suddenly who you need to be concentrating on. You don't know because the cameras have not had time to pick up. So that's when they're the hardest stages of all to call.
Do you ever dare risk stepping out of yourself and having a listen to what you're saying as you're saying it, aware that all those stages that you're saying that you would Google now or look on YouTube of Eddie Merckx back in the day, and the history that isn't your history, that you're now forming a part of that history for current and future cycling fans. Your narrative, your voice will be describing those momentous victories, crashes, whatever that might be. Do you ever listen to yourself saying that, thinking, well, I can't change it once I've said it?
I'm very aware of that. My first race where I took over from Phil Liggett, who'd been doing it for so long on British television, Chris Froome ran up Mont Ventoux.
Chris Froome is running up Mont Ventoux without a bike. How far has he got to go?
He's got to wait for a teammate to get to him. So, my goodness, I've never seen anything like this. His bike's so great. The team cars are so far behind. The team cars are miles behind. So he can't do anything about this at the moment. His bike is on a team car. He's got to wait for one of his teammates to get out there. There's Richie Porte again getting held up by a car. Chris Froome can't do anything.
The yellow jersey is running up the Tour de France.
So you had your kind of it's Stephen Roach moment on the very first race, and I'm sure I didn't do it particularly memorably, and I genuinely don't know what I said.
Have you not watched that back?
No, I don't.
You never watch it back?
No, I don't really. I kind of know what I did right, and I certainly know what I did wrong, and I move on, and I bear that knowledge with me. But I don't. I mean, you broadcast, you don't watch stuff back, do you? You don't kind of. But I kind of tend to think about the next day.
Do you ever watch rival broadcasters? Do you ever keep an eye on what they're doing?
All the time. I mean, I do it because it's I'm obsessed with cycling. I love watching bike race. I'll watch any bike race, and I take things from my colleagues who commentate, absolutely. And if I know they're doing something that impresses me, that I want to incorporate, I'll learn from that and take it on board, for definite.
But what happens is, eventually the flag drops in some miserable northern French town in the drizzle. And then instantly, in the flash of an eye, that's not a phrase either, in the blink of an eye, a breakaway forms, and it will have 3 Frenchmen in it. And then, for the next 5 hours, nothing happens. Chateau! What? 12th century? Get your facts right, my son. Ruined ramparts, sunflowers, chateau, nothing happens. 5 hours, nothing happens. And then, with about 10 kilometres to go, Thomas Voeckler, the sole remaining rider from the breakaway, is caught. And it all comes back together again, and the pace gets very high as the big sprinters get their lead-out trains vying for position on the road to the front of the race, and they hurtle towards the finishing line. And with about 3k to go, that's the opportunity for some unknown Belgian to launch a spurious and hopeless attack off the front. But that only lasts about a kilometre. He too is caught, and it all comes together again under the Flamme Rouge as their sprint trains propel their heroes towards the finishing line. They eventually peel off all the lead-out men, and with about 250 metres to go, that is the point when the big sprinters unleash their devastating turn of pace, and Peter Sagan takes Mark Cavendish into the barriers, and he crashes and he gets disqualified, and in the end they hurtling towards the finish line at 70 kilometres an hour with only a millimetre of lycra separating them from the skittering tarmac and certain doom. Marcel Kittel wins, and that is a sprinty stage.
So what about this brand new, soundingly terrifying venture, your one-man show?
Oh, wow, yeah.
Where has that come from, and how is it going? I mean, it's a completely different departure, and it's something that is completely new. It's not like the natural progression of broadcasting.
No, it's a bit unique. I mean, some theatrical producers who work out of the West End who've got like Alice in Wonderland touring China at the moment, really big shows. They came up with this suggestion that sooner or later someone's going to take the sport of cycling and do a one-man show about it. I mean, there is a kind of template that vaguely is similar that exists with cricket, like Test Match Special Live and things like that, where they do an evening with Aggers and all this kind of, that kind of thing. But I mean, what I do is very different from that. But they said, listen, cycling is the kind of audience that would buy into something like that. And sooner or later, someone's going to do it, and you'll be cross it's not you. And I kind of took that on board and went, well, maybe, but they said, well, do you think you can write? Do you think you can keep people entertained for a couple of hours on your own, talking about cycling? Well, I've got absolutely no idea, but I mean, I have done loads of. We've done them together, haven't we? I've done loads of kind of like events in theatres that have been quite formal and chatting about cycling. So I know that through doing those, I know there is an appetite and a potential audience there. Whether or not I can make what is essentially kind of a stand-up show about cycling work. I didn't know, but I did 14 dates last year, and it sold really well, and a few venues completely sold out, and I really enjoyed it, and I hope people really enjoyed it. So we kind of came back, and we're doing 25 dates this year, and we've gone up in terms of, last year I was touring sort of 500-seat theatres. This year it's 800 seats mostly, and the final date in London is in the Lyric Theatre, Shaftesbury Avenue, which we sold out. So I'm going to the West End, which is nuts, isn't it? I mean, it's kind of a one-man show about cycling with a bloke off the telly, so it shouldn't really make sense or work, but it kind of does.
But that's amazing.
But it's a bit crazy, yeah.
So you still consider yourself a newbie, and you're probably the most established. It doesn't get more acclaimed than taking your show to the West End and talking about cycling, does it? I mean, that's pretty cool.
It's head-scratchingly wonderful. I mean, I'm kind of blessed. I love doing it so much as well. Breaks down into two halves. The first half, I literally bite the hand that feeds me, because I just ridicule everything about that I see in front of, that I belong to. You know, the British cycling kind of bubble in all its manifestations. I just take to the cleaners for an hour, and people sitting there going, "Oh, you can't say that. Oh God, he said that," and I kind of shoot down all these sacred cows and all this sort of thing. And the second half, I kind of focus much more on the Tour de France, and it's a bit gossipy, and we kind of celebrate things, and we laugh about other things and all that sort of thing. And that's the show. And next year, in a couple of years, I'm going to come back with a totally different show that I'm thinking about now and rewrite it. I've already got some ideas for that, but it's become a huge part of my life. And I never thought it would. I mean, it wasn't even on my radar a couple of years ago. So yeah, it's crazy. You should come and see it.
I will. I know a community. That kind of, I think, sums up a lot about you and your career and your position, I guess. You say you didn't even envisage it a few years ago, and now it's such a huge part of your life, and that's kind of the way it's been for cycling, really, isn't it? I mean, it's
completely.
Something that, dare I say, now defines you. It's certainly a huge part of who you are, isn't it?
Completely. I mean, in a public, visible way, it defines me, because people, that's how they consume my broadcast work and my books that I write, and now the theatre show. But also, look, Orla, I'm about to cycle to work. You know, it consumes me. I hop on a bike. I don't own a car. I don't have a car. I go everywhere that I possibly can on my bike. It actually consumes physically. I've even lost weight because cycling riding a bike has consumed me.
It's eating me alive.
It's eaten bits of me away. You know, I can't put it any other way than that. It's taken over my life. And now it's another little thing that I increasingly want to get involved with, because it affects me, is the kind of whole Chris Boardman-led advocacy thing, you know, about how can we stop being a slightly despised minority? You know, how can we stop repelling people, and how can we break through into the non-cycling community and win hearts and minds and make clear to people that what we have at our disposal is an immense potentially an immense contribution to the sum of human happiness, not a problem, not an irritation, you know, not something for the likes of Adam Boulting to rail about in the newspaper, but something else. And I think occasionally we're our own worst enemies on that. So I want to kind of unlock all of that, and that's another thing I want to explore.
If you're able to answer this, we have the answer already, but what is the answer? How do we do that? Is it, as they did in Holland, changing the law so that the driver is responsible for knocking over a cyclist regardless of fault, or the fault is assumed? Is it, I mean, we can't change culture. What do we do?
Well, we can change the culture. We can, but I think it requires money, actually. Don't forget that the Dutch culture shifted much, much later on than people think, and as a result of, what was it, a £20 per head per year investment over a 10-20 year period or something, and it was a significant amount of money. We're not even approaching a tenth of that, and until we get to those levels of investment in really quite cheap cycling infrastructure compared to anything else. I mean, Chris will have these figures much better than me, but the cost of completely reconfiguring a city the size of Leeds to make, you know, to build all the segregated lanes that you would need equates to like half the cost of refurbishing a single London Underground tube station or something like that. It's like, it's just kind of head-scratchingly easy to do with the little bit of political will. And I think that, and only that, is the answer, because I do think although I don't know if you'd ride much around London, but I do think
I'm terrified. I love riding my bike. It makes me happy, makes my soul sing, but I am terrified.
And you're not alone. And one of the answers to that are the segregated lanes. The stretch along the embankment, and it continues to proliferate in branches off to the north and south now in all sorts of different directions, and the plans are there to kind of roll it out even further. But that flagship stretch along the embankment of segregated cycle lanes is two things. One, it's an absolute pleasure to ride along, and if you ever do, you will just relax. As soon as you get on it, you'll go, and the weight will fall off you, because you know that you're not going to come to any harm, and you can just switch off and enjoy it. But what it does better than anything else is it shows people who are stuck in cars, who are walking along the side or stuck in a bus, they look out the window and they go, oh, look at that. And the numbers of people using it now, and the types of people using it, are kind of eye-opening, actually. So if we can make it a visible success and a visible pleasure that we show people like that, then that's a one concrete. And it didn't take much to do, just a little bit of political bravery, and not very much money. So yeah, I do feel strongly about that. It's not a particularly sexy subject to talk about, is it? But I do feel strongly about that.
One.
You talk about the kind of way, that I've kind of, I didn't think I'd end up doing this, and now I am doing it, and I didn't think that applies all the way through my journey through cycling. And I have Richard Moore, weirdly, to thank massively for that, because he was the one who suggested, we were sitting in a crappy hotel somewhere in the northwest of England on the Tour of Britain years and years ago. I think it was the first race I ever covered of the Tour of Britain, and he was fascinated with, even back then, it was about 2008 it was, with what had happened to me falling in love with cycling. And he said, you should write a book about that. And I couldn't write a book. He said, well, you should try. And he introduced me to his agent. I got a book deal on the road with my first book, and that kind of changed everything. So I have Richard to thank for kind of showing me that. I do, genuinely. I sent him a bottle of wine to bloody thank him as well. Back in the day. Yeah. But I do. But I do actually, because he kind of like said, you could have a crack at doing that. And ever since then, I've gone, I could have a crack at doing that.
Yeah.
I could have a crack at doing that. And I don't think I've run out of new things to sort of have a go at yet. And I think it's a long way off.
Yeah, I hope so as well. Ned, we've taken up more than enough of your time.
Oh no, it's been brilliant. I've really enjoyed it, actually. It's focused my mind. Trying to remind myself of what it is.
Why you do it. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Thank you to Orla and Ned for this week's episode of the Cycling Podcast. Do catch Ned's show if you can, but if you miss it, I'm sure it'll be back next year. And I'll be back next week with Lionel Birney and Daniel Freeb. A reminder that we've got a special episode that's imminent. It may even be out already. It's an in-depth look by Daniel at the Team of the Year, Sunweb, with interviews with some of the key people there, including the Giro winner, Tom Dumoulin. It's a great listen, really interesting, really in-depth, and if you want to listen to it and you're not already a friend of the podcast, sign up at thecyclingpodcast.com. It's only £10 for the year, and we'll soon be announcing our 2018 Friends package. You can also sign up at thecyclingpodcast.com to receive our weekly newsletter, which contains all kinds of useful information. And a reminder that also at cyclingpodcast.com/shop, you can buy our Rapha t-shirts and cycling jerseys. Looking forward to seeing some of you at our show at the Arts Centre in London on Monday the 20th of November. But all that remains for this week is to say thanks to Will Jones, who produced this episode.